One thing I want to impress upon you about using binary bit patterns is that a bit pattern is just that. It's a bit pattern, and it's up to you as the designer to interpret that into the representation that it means. Okay, so I have this example here where I have 0, 1, 0, 0, and 0, 0, 0, 1. That would be 0, 4, 1 in hex, okay? So 41 in hex, 4 times 16 plus 1 would be 65, so that's 65 in decimal. But if you represent it, if you saw this bit pattern and you were representing text, this would be the character A. So it depends on what you're trying to do. All right, so bits by themselves, they don't really carry meaning. You have to assign that meaning by choosing what kind of representation. That representation could be a numeric representation, which is what we're trying to emphasize in this particular video. These could also be other types of representations where, for example, I just mentioned hex. That'd be a different thing. That's not really numerical values directly. Okay, so one thing I want you to think about is when you choose bit patterns and sizes for bit patterns, those come with some cost. So if you don't need to represent a lot of different things, if you're trying to represent numbers 0 through 15, for example, you only need 4 bits. If I need a larger range, I would need 8 bits. An even larger range would be 16 bits. Every time you have to add bits, it gives you range, it buys you range, but it costs you in terms of storage. If it's a design, it also typically every bit that you add has a wire associated with it. It's area on a chip, it's power used. Those are things that you have to think about when you're looking at bit patterns and what size to have. So questions that often come up on the design side is what range is required? Do we need the values to be just positive, or do we need them to be both positive and negative? And then what would happen on overflow? Maybe there's some possibility that you don't have a large enough bit size. How are you going to handle that? Who reads the value? Are you going to represent this directly in binary, decimal, or hex? That's something that has to be interpreted when you see the bit pattern. And so who reads it? You have to, come up with interfaces sometimes when you do design, and you have to communicate exactly what you're talking about in terms of width, what the signed value of the number is going to be, how it's encoded, those kind of things. So many of the logic bugs turn out to be actually representation bugs of bit patterns. And so I want you to think about that as we move through this material. So this is what we're talking about here. I want you to realize that there's different ways of interpreting these patterns. And so as you go through this sequence, you learn how to do some conversion fluency to help you represent bit patterns and interpret those in the right way. So things we're going to talk about are binary to decimal conversion. So you go from binary to decimal and back. Binary to hex. Hex is a convenient shorthand for binary. I don't think of hex as actually a separate number system. I think it as a representation of binary, strictly a representation of binary, where you can more efficiently represent bit patterns. And so from there, once you have a hex representation, you can go between hex and decimal. Then if you have signed numbers, you can figure out how you have to modify things to make that happen using 2's complement. That's the usual method for doing that. So those are the sections ahead. I want you to understand how it all fits together before you start the journey through this. You're going to be looking at how I take a set of bits and interpret those in different ways.